Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist minister and social activist who led the civil rights movement in the United States from the mid-1950s until his death by assassination in 1968.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
He was born January 15, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. King, both a Baptist minister and civil rights activist, had a seismic impact on race relations in the United States beginning in the mid-1950s. Among many efforts, King headed the SCLC. Through his activism, he played a pivotal role in ending the legal segregation of African American citizens in the South and other areas of the nation, as well as the creation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. King received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, among several other honors. King was assassinated in April 1968 and continues to be remembered as one of the most lauded African American leaders in history, often referenced by his 1963 speech, "I Have a Dream." I want to do this story on Martin Luther King because there's something about his assassination that I don't see a lot of people talking about. Actually, something that I didn't know about until just a few years ago. By 1968, the years of demonstrations and confrontations were beginning to wear on Martin Luther King Jr. He had grown tired of marches, going to jail, and living under the constant threat of death. He was becoming discouraged at the slow progress of civil rights in America and the increasing criticism from other African American leaders. Plans were in the works for another march on Washington to revive his movement and bring attention to a widening range of issues. In the spring of 1968, a labor strike by Memphis sanitation workers drew King to one last crusade. On April 3rd, in what proved to be an eerily prophetic speech, he told supporters, "I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land." And the next day, while standing on a balcony outside his room at the Lorraine Motel, Martin Luther King Jr. was struck by a sniper's bullet. The shooter, a malcontent drifter and former convict named James Earl Ray, was eventually apprehended after a 2-month international manhunt. The killing sparked riots and demonstrations in more than 100 cities across the country. In 1969, Ray pleaded guilty to assassinating King and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. He died in prison on April 23, 1998. William F. Pepper, King's family and personal friend, won a civil trial that found the U.S. government agencies guilty of assassination, wrongful death. The 1999 trial, King family versus Jowers and other unknown co-conspirators, was the only trial conducted on this assassination. Coretta Scott King said, "We have done what we can to reveal the truth, and we now urge you as members of the media, and we call upon officials, elected officials, and other persons of influence to do what they can to share the revelation of this case to the widest possible audience." She welcomed the verdict, saying, "There is abundant evidence of a major high-level conspiracy in the assassination of my husband, Martin Luther King Jr., and the civil rights unanimous verdict has validated our belief. I wholeheartedly applaud the verdict of the jury, and I feel that justice has been well served in their deliberations. This verdict is not only a great victory for my family, but also a great victory for America. It is a great victory for truth itself. It is important to know that this was a swift verdict delivered after about an hour of jury deliberation. I'll remind you that it was a unanimous jury decision. And here is an excerpt. The court. I have authorized this gentleman here to take one picture of you, which I'm going to have developed and make copies and send to you as I promised. Okay, all right, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you, do all of you agree with this verdict? And the jury says, yes, in unison. The court. In answer to the question, did Lloyd Jowers participate in a conspiracy to do harm to Martin Luther King? Your answer is yes. Do you also find that others, including governmental agencies, were parties to this conspiracy as alleged by the defendant? Your answer to that one is also yes. Is everybody clear on that? The United States government has been found in a civil trial in a court of law to be unanimously found guilty in the assassination of Martin Luther King. The overwhelming evidence of U.S. government complicity found valid by the jury includes U.S. 111th Military Intelligence Group were at Dr. King's location during the assassination. 20th Special Forces Group had an 8-man sniper team at the assassination location on that day. Usual Memphis police special bodyguards were advised they weren't needed on the day of the assassination. Regular and constant police protection for Dr. King was removed from protecting Dr. King an hour before the assassination. Military intelligence set up photographers on the roof of a fire station with clear view to Dr. King's balcony. Dr. King's room was changed from a secure first-floor room to an exposed balcony room. Memphis police ordered the scene where multiple witnesses reported as the source of shooting cut down of their bushes that would have hit a sniper. Along with sanitizing a crime scene, police abandoned investigative procedure to interview witnesses who lived by the scene of the shooting. The rifle Mr. Ray delivered was not matched to the bullet that killed Dr. King and was not sighted to accurately shoot. Okay, this is extremely interesting and telltale. Media coverage of the Simpson trial, O.J. Simpson, which began in January 1995, was unlike any other. Over 2,000 reporters covered the trial, and 80 miles of cable was required to allow 19 television stations to cover the trial live to 91% of the American viewing audience. When the verdict was finally read on October 3, 1995, some 142 million people listened or watched. It seemed the nation stood still, divided along racial lines as to the defendant's guilt or innocence. During and after the trial, over 80 books were published about the event by almost everyone involved in the Simpson case. Now, journalist and author James Douglas had this to say about the corporate controlled media about the civil trial. I can hardly believe for Martin Luther King, I can hardly believe the fact that, apart from the courtroom participants, only Memphis TV reporter Wendell Stacy and I attended from beginning to end this historic 3.5 week trial. Because of journalistic neglect, scarcely anyone else in this land of ours even knows what went on in it. After critical testimony was given in the trial's second week before an almost empty gallery, Barbara Rice, U.S. correspondent for the Lisbon Daily Publico, who was there several days, turned to me and said, "Everything in the U.S. is the trial of the century. O.J. Simpson's trial was the trial of the century. Clinton's trial was the trial of the century. But this is the trial of the century. And who's here?" No one was there, except for those few people. So let's summarize. Under U.S. civil law, covert U.S. government agencies were found guilty of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King was the leading figure of the civil rights movement a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and widely recognized as one of the world's greatest speakers for what it means to be human. The family's conclusion as to motive was to prevent Dr. King from ending the Vietnam War because the government wanted to continue its ongoing illegal, covert, and overt military operations to control foreign governments and their resources. It is therefore a factual statement that under U.S. civil law, the U.S. government assassinated Dr. King. I'm going to read that again. It is therefore a factual statement that under U.S. civil law, the U.S. government assassinated Dr. King. People need to understand this reality. It's just mind-boggling to me that this, in a court of law, the U.S. government is found guilty of assassinating Martin Luther King. And what's done about it? What is done about it?
But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right.